What is up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets'd podcast. A little bit of a flu game for me today. I've been battling something. I don't know. I went to the doctor. It's not strep. It's not COVID. It's not SARS. It's not RSV. So I'm going to be a little ASMR today and probably not as loud and pungent as I normally am. Maybe I came out hot. I don't know. I haven't talked on a microphone in a while, but still got to give you guys a great episode of the Mets'd podcast. As you heard in the intro, a lot to talk about here. Not really. Adam Ottavino's back. Justin Turner's not coming back. Pipeline and the offseason sucks. Me and James are going to do a lot of just kind of talking, a little bit of rambling in today's episode. So we hope you guys do enjoy it. As always, make sure you're following us on all our social media at Mets'd on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you want the YouTube version of this, remember, we're not with the Mets anymore, so it's now on the Mets'd podcast YouTube channel. Shout out to you guys for the amazing support over there. The boys are finally monetized back on YouTube, so we're going to be pumping out some content over there, as always. And appreciate the feedback on the last episode, too. Something a little bit different, especially on the YouTube side. Took a little bit of a different angle with the podcast that past week, and you guys seem to enjoy it. So we are going to continue to do it as long as you guys like it. But James, I legitimately haven't seen you in a while because I've been sick. So how's life? How's things?
Yeah, Mark stays sick because he is a gremlin, lives in his cave in darkness and plays video games till 4 a.m. Him and I got this basically the same thing, and I got healthy like 4 or 5 days ago. Totally, we both had fevers, we both had sore throats, but again, he's a gremlin. He lives in a cave, and he plays CS:GO till 4 o'clock in the morning while I eat fruit and vegetables and he got some sleep, and now I'm okay. But life's been good. I got this crazy pimple on my nose right now for the YouTube people.
Yeah.
I look and feel like Rudolph. It hurts. It's like a lot of pressure on there, but we're soldiering on this podcast. And the big news, Mets world, the only thing that's really happened relatively at all, which is even funny that it's going to headline episodes, that Adam Ottavino re-signed with the team, 1 year, $4.5 million. That's totally an exactly fine contract, commensurate with, I screwed up that word, commensurate, I don't even know, commensurate with his value.
Is that even the right word? I don't even know what you're trying to say.
We're going to blow right past it. Totally fine, though. It's totally fine. It's a fine contract for a fine reliever. It's less money than John Brebbia and Luke Jackson are making. He's not – this contract tells you he's not – what?
Puke Jackson?
Puke Jackson, the very one and the same. But this contract tells you he's a relief pitcher who's not really a high-leverage guy anymore, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, Ottavino, we don't want him to be the eighth-inning guy. I think he probably understands he's not going to be the eighth-inning guy going into this upcoming season. We shouldn't feel good if he is. We know he has an inability to get out left-handed batters. We saw that really amplified last season. But hopefully with the new management in charge going on over there with the Mets, use him a little bit smarter, because against righties, he still is very effective.
It actually wasn't even as true last year. I think that the season got so out of hand that a lot of us, just you and I included, just kind of like threw inhibition to the wind and really stopped analyzing things as season went on, because we're like, why are we doing this? There's no point in analyzing changes in Adam Ottavino's pitch mix.
We also couldn't, but
yeah, we weren't really totally allowed to either. But he like totally transformed himself as a pitcher last year. Now, Ottavino's done this a few times in his career, first being like sweeper sinkers, and then being sweeper fastballs, and then being sweeper sinker fastball, and like changing the percentages of everything. But last year was a lot of changes. And the main reason was because he lost his fastball. He went from a guy who was like 95, 96 to a guy who was more like 93, 94. Which sounds like a big gap, like losing basically 2 miles an hour across the board. But it's even a bigger gap because he went from someone who was average to above average to very strongly below average fastball velocity. So that pitch got smoked, and he's like, all right, I can't lean this anymore. So his sinker passed his sweeper and became his primary pitch. First time anything's become his primary pitch besides a sweeper since 2016.
Whoa.
Yes, it's a long time. 7 years as of last year.
With the Rockies?
Yes, last year with the Rockies.
Wow.
I think, or maybe second last year with the Rockies, right before Yankees. So again, really long time ago. This is a lifetime ago for Adam Ottavino. And the only counts last year where his sinker wasn't his most thrown pitch were 0-1, 1-1, and 2-2. So, which is bizarre in and of itself. Like, that's really weird to me that he was still even throwing mostly sinkers when he was 1-2, 0-2. I don't know. I don't know why that makes sense. I think it was just because he needed a pitch that he could rely on more for soft contact, and that was why he kind of got through last season. That was one of the things that made him really good in 2022, being able to marry swings and misses, whiffs, strikeouts with soft contact. That's why he was one of the best relievers statistically in baseball that year. But compared to 2022, the sweeper was the leader in every single count for Adam besides 1-0, 2-0, 3-1, and 3-0. Just to show you the difference in his mentality and how he was approaching every single at bat this year compared to last.
Yeah, I mean, even watching it last year, like there were plenty of times where he still looked good. He still looked sharp. He just wasn't that dominant 2022 that we saw. And that makes sense, again, for a guy who is getting older. But as you mentioned with Ottavino, he's always tinkering. And he's also a huge guy. He loves it seems like pitch shape and pitch mechanics. And he has that like pitching lab that he over in Queens or Brooklyn, wherever it is.
Something like that.
Yeah, he's got like this whole pitching academy going on. So he's someone who is not only, a good pitcher or a good relief pitcher, but he's someone who's dedicated to making sure that he stays on top of his game and is always trying to get better. So yeah, at like $4.5 million, there's really nothing wrong with this contract at all. And he's going to give you some competent innings. He's going to get some big outs. That sweeper is still pretty nasty. Like when that thing's moving, it's a Frisbee. It's disgusting.
Yeah, the pitch is definitely gross, but I also think he, again, partly what you said before, kind of knows and saw that it's not a good pitch to be using as primary anymore because it can't really do the job against lefties.
Yeah.
This was his career low sweeper slider percentage last season, lowest of entire career. Also, with that was career high in his cutter percentage, and that kind of became the main weapon he used against lefties. And career high new pitch that basically was developed from the last 18 months, changeup percentage, and that kind of has best results of any pitch, especially in terms of run value, which run value is like an amalgamation of the contact made against these pitches, the results of these pitches, swings and misses of these pitches, like if the pitch was either a ball or a strike. So the changeup, which came out of nowhere, kind of wound up being his best pitch. Both of those two pitches were really useful for him against lefties. He still wasn't like really good against lefties, and overall his walk rate went way up, which I'm sure was also part of using all these new pitches and trying to figure all this new stuff out. And also just, I don't know, the situations he was being used in last year, we were losing and he was trying to hang on. There were men on base. Like didn't really work that well. We also know that he can't really hold runners on, but it's like 70% of relievers can't. So whatever. He still got tons of ground balls. Strikeouts and whiffs fell hard though, but the soft contact was still high. When you look at him now, like 2022 feels like the outlier, that was like a season where he was one of the best relievers in baseball. But again, for John Brebbia money, like I think this is totally fine.
Yeah. And I think that changeup too, this year will be the true test as to whether or not that's a real pitch. Cause a lot of times too, like if he didn't throw the changeup in the past, you see the changeup. Even if in the scouting report, you're like, he's thrown it so little. Like how many times am I going to see it? Still going to surprise you a little bit. It's still going to be a new pitch that you weren't necessarily fully prepped for. So I think this year, if you see success with that changeup against lefties, that's going to be a bigger deal than it even was last year.
I think I'm loading it right now, but I'm pretty sure it got to like 15% usage rate on that changeup for the whole year. So I think that was something that, again, like last year was like a 3 to 4%. And now this year suddenly was like, oh, this guy's actually using this changeup. Hold on, I finally loaded. Savant's being slow. It's being so slow.
You got to delete those cookies, man. I mean, I have to put in all my usernames and passwords again, but I deleted the cookies. It's back to working.
It was 14% last year on that changeup. So again, that was a pitch that was legitimately used. It was still his fourth most thrown pitch, but even the fact that the new Ottavino had 4 pitches, he threw at least 14% of the time, that's relevant. It's a different pitcher, and that's hopefully something that can be built off. And that's coming up 7% 2022 and 1% in each of 2021, 3% 2020. The 2020 was the first time he used the pitch since 2014. So Ottavino's changing himself as a pitcher. A lot of things are happening there, but there was also something interesting about this contract I wanted to talk about briefly, and that was the fact that it seemed like a lot of the Mets accounts and people went around like kind of trying to dunk on Ottavino, being like, oh my God, he declined his $6.75 million option, take a $4 million contract. Like, what an idiot. Like, Mets got him. It wasn't really totally true at all. And a lot of people ran with the story and it got a lot of engagement. But just to put it out there, $4 million of that $6.75 million that Ottavino had in that option were deferred to 2032 through 2035. Yeah. And I found a guy on Twitter. His name was Chisholm, and he said not affiliated with Jazz, and he's like a Marlins guy with a couple hundred followers, but a funny guy. It's a good tweet, and he took that money that Adam Ottavino would have been owed, put a 3% inflation rate per year down until we got to 2032, and then that $4 million would have actually become a little bit less than $3 million between those years. So then technically he did still lose like more than $1 million, but now because he still is getting 275 compared to the 4 he would have gotten right away, but he can take the money he's gotten now and just invest it and make more money.
Oh yeah, 100%. I saw that too. Like a lot of Mets fans trying to dunk like Ottavino losing out on this money. I'm like, the guy's been a good dude. I don't want to dunk on the player for not getting his money. Like if anything, dunk on the billionaires. Like when they get, when they lose money here and there. But yeah, I mean, he's been a good dude. He's always been very friendly to us in the couple times that we've gotten to speak to him. And he comes out to an electric song. I'm just super happy that I get at least one more year of Come Alive, Kid Cudi, when he comes out, because it is absolutely electric.
Say what you want about the Mets bullpen right now, and we're going to do a deeper breakdown on what this bullpen has and doesn't have over the next few weeks here. But we have some good songs.
Such good songs. I mean, listen, and if anybody needs some suggestions, Drew Smith, I know, friend of the podcast, he's had a great one. He doesn't probably need any help, but maybe some of the other guys, maybe some of the new guys, not familiar with New York. James has incredible New York rap knowledge, so he can give you some bangers.
No, we have Smith with Electric Feel, Diaz, of course. We have Adam Ottavino will Come Alive. Brooks Raley, I think last year was some country shit.
It was a bad country song.
Yeah, well,
his name's Brooks.
That's what I'm saying. I won't hold it against him because he's still such a good reliever. I know Jorge Lopez is a big Drake guy, so I think he'll probably come out to a Drake song, which take it as you leave it, but I think a lot of people will prefer that.
He'll be hype.
Whatever this bullpen has and doesn't have, it's got some music. And another thing that the Mets roster will not have next year, probably never again, I mean, I'll knock on wood because maybe we'll get him as a 40-year-old, but Justin Turner. Yes. And Justin Turner signed a 1-year deal with the Blue Jays on Tuesday morning. Yeah, Tuesday morning. And the first thing I thought in my head was like, I simply don't care. Justin Turner. What? Justin Turner was not a good fit for this team. I think he's a fine player, but doesn't really offer what this roster needs. And I just seeing him not being on the Mets and seeing people get overexcited that Justin Turner is coming to the Mets with his leadership, I'm very happy about that.
Mine was more thank God, and it was just simply because it's not that I don't think Justin Turner is going to be good with the Blue Jays. I think he's probably going to have a fine year, just what Justin Turner does every single year. He's going to be a completely fine player. But it just felt like if or when he came to the Mets, it was going to be a disaster. And I'm glad I don't have to live in that world anymore.
I mean, it's weird to look up in a world and see Justin Turner hitting under 275. It is. It's weird. And the thing about Justin Turner is that's kind of the player he is now. He got that bump last year, and a big part of that was Fenway Park. And I found a great tweet from a friend in the fantasy industry, Eric Samolsky at SAMSKINYC, podcast for Pitcher List. He writes for NBC Roto World. A note on Turner to Toronto. Last year, Turner pulled 38 fly balls. And 38 fly balls pulled doesn't seem like a lot, but Mark and I just went through this exercise, and 38 fly balls pulled was actually, I just lost it. Where is it? 38 fly balls pulled was the tied for the 30th most pulled fly balls in the entire league. So it actually is kind of a lot of pulled fly balls, even though the number does seem low. He hit 16 home runs on those pulled fly balls, 16 home runs in them. And he hit 711 batting average on those pulled fly balls. That 711 batting average was higher than any player in baseball last year with at least 25 pulled fly balls. The highest 711 batting average. We're not a batting average podcast, but 7 out of 10 times he pulled a fly ball was a hit. And a big reason for that was the green monster. And Justin Turner losing that green monster, I think, is severely going to hurt his power production, even just his hitting output last year. I'm not saying he's not a good player, but his barrel rate went down. His exit velocity wasn't that good. And Citi Field is cavernous for right-handed power hitters. It's a really, really, really hard place for right-handed hitters to get to power. Based on StatCast park factors, it was the 29th most difficult park over the last 3 years for right-handed hitters to hit. The only one harder was Safeco Field in Seattle, which is also a place that right hitters cannot hit. There's so many other things about Justin Turner that didn't work, and I think this is the one that's being understated the most right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've had so many conversations privately about how it's not that we think Justin Turner is a bad player. He's a bad fit with the Mets and Citi Field and the current structure of this team because, relatively speaking, what he was going to give the Mets, because again, that's super important, I think. If he played for the Red Sox again this upcoming season, probably would have put up similar great numbers, would be in my fantasy team because he was great there. But if he was playing for the Mets, not only do I not want him on my team, but I definitely don't want him on my fantasy team because the power numbers are not going to be the same. The extra base hit numbers are not going to be the same. The average is not going to be the same. He's just not going to play there. So at least now, we can sleep well at night knowing that offensively, we're not going to have to worry about seeing Justin Turner play for the Mets in Citi Field. And not to mention, like, defensively at third base, everybody's talking about him there. He's garbage at third base now, guys. Like, he is 39 years old. He can't play the position. He's not going to do it for the Blue Jays probably that much either, to be honest.
No, he was born, I think, during the Reagan administration to give you guys a sense of how old Justin Turner is. And he can't really understand also how poor he was in the field last year. And the Red Sox didn't really care about defense last year. Seems like that was kind of a statement of Chaim Bloom's teams, where especially at the positions that weren't center field or shortstop, we don't really care that much about defense. And last year, that was exemplified by the fact that they played Turner at second base for a good chunk of the season, which again, that was huge for fantasy. Justin Turner single-handedly won me 2 fantasy leagues because he was a player that was not drafted in 80% of fantasy leagues across the world and wound up hitting 290 with 25 homers and 90. Amazing. But his arm has completely fallen off a cliff in the last few years. He's ranking the 14th percentile in Baseball Savant in terms of arm strength, which is definitely not a guy I really want third base very much, which is probably another reason why the Red Sox moved him across the diamond from third to second. He wound up having more attempts at second base than third, and he can't even move, which also goes to show how much teams care about second base defensively compared to other
Yeah.
positions as well. It's not really one that you can have like significant defensive value. And even with the fewest attempts, third base was by far, again, his worst position by OAA. And all three of the positions he played last year, third, second, and first, he had a negative outs above average.
And you got to remember, too, at third base, the Red Sox play Rafael Devers, who hitting wise, incredible. Defensively, one of the worst defensive third basemen in the league. He's absolutely horrible as well. And they're like, still want you to play third base defensively over Justin Turner. Because like Rafael Devers, wow, he's going to make a great DH when he turns like 32. But like right now, they're still playing him at third base. But he can't be that much better than Justin Turner. Like, he's not good defensively. So if you wanted to go with his glove over Turner's, speaks to the volume of what Justin Turner gives you in the field. And if you guys thought you were mad about watching Brett Beatty play third base, imagine how frustrated you would see watching Justin Turner play third base.
It'd be so much different also because he'd be making like $14 million to do it. And the last thing about Justin Turner, about why he also wouldn't be a good fit, he offers zero athleticism. He's 39 years old. He's in the 9th percentile of sprint speed last year. That's in the same range as Kyle Higashioka and Mike Moustakas, to give you a sense of what his speed is like. And again, part of that comes from being old and having some foot. He had some foot issues last year, I believe, as well, some lower body stuff. And part of that sprint speed comes to the fact that he's not really gunning into first base. Like we see that reflected with Starling Marte, where apparently last year all the Mets raced like home to first, and Marte won.
Which I believe,
totally. But then you go on Baseball Savant, you look at his sprint speed, and he's like in the 30th percentile. Because sometimes you're at this point in your career, it doesn't make as much sense for you to run hard to first base every single time. It doesn't. But Baseball Savant and Fangraphs also rank Turner as one of the worst base runners in the league. So with his slow speed, he also isn't really doing that great work out there anyway, getting extra stuff, cutting bags. Like Foolish Baseball's had a great video about how good Freddie Freeman is running the bases. That goes to show you can be old and you can not be fast, but you can still run the bases really well. Turner does none of that. This team is trying to get younger, is trying to get faster, is trying to get better defensively, is trying to get more versatile. Turner offered none of that while we have one of the worst parks for right-handed power hitter. I won't say right-handed power hitter, a right-hander with fringe power. This doesn't apply to someone like Pete Alonso. It doesn't apply for Cisco Alvarez. Wouldn't apply to Jorge Soler. This applies to a guy with fringe power, with a barrel rate that's in the 30th percentile, who pulls the ball an average amount, hits above average amount of fly balls, has below average exit velocity. You'll get swallowed up here, and he would wind up with like a 15 homer, 260 average. I don't think this team really needs that.
And I think something that Mets fans, especially this offseason, are doing is forgetting like the age of Justin Turner. Like this isn't 33-year-old Justin Turner from the 2015 playoffs where like he absolutely tormented the Mets. That was 10 years ago, guys. That was 9 years ago. He is way older now. He is a very different player. You even see it a little bit with JD Martinez and some Mets fans too, where they're like, this got to get this guy. I'd much rather prefer him obviously over Justin Turner because he does still hit the ball very hard. But at the end of the day, like these players are older. Like I don't know, how many times do we need to see as Mets fans signing these old guys? I mean, we just did an episode about the worst Mets of all time, like statistically speaking. There was a world where if Justin Turner came back this year, based on what he did with the Mets the first time, he could have been on that list because he would have had like 200 plus games of being a bad hitter possibly with the Mets. And it's because like he's old now. It's just, he's a different player. And I think people just kind of get lost in the name sometimes rather than seeing what's actually happening.
The name and the story, just the fact that like we can make this right. We blew this. No, you just blew it. Sometimes you have to just move on when you failed.
And they didn't even blow it. He was bad with the Mets. He was terrible in the games that he played. So like, wow, he left and went to the Dodgers, who then can literally turn water into wine. Like good for the Dodgers, not bad for the Mets.
Yeah, again, also just sometimes you have to lose and move on. It's true about everything in life. Maybe it's even true about their Mets fandom sometimes, but sometimes you just have to take your failures, get up, dust yourself off, and go on to the next one. And I think that's just where it is, Justin Turner. I don't think he would have significantly changed the impact of this team or the outcomes of this team. It's okay. He's on a different team, whatever. And now what's going on? I was also seeing this when I've been editing these again. You say 100% so much during these podcasts. It's hysterical.
Do I really?
You got to keep track. I'm sure maybe if the listeners know, maybe hit up Mark, go into replies, go in the comments. Let's listen to how many times Mark says 100%, because it is hysterical how many times he says 100% during an episode.
Really? I mean, it's good. It's great. It's a good way to explain that you really mean it. 100%.
Yeah, 100%. Can't go higher. Mark won't go lower. But
won't go lower.
Moving on. Next thing we got here, MLB Pipeline top 100 prospects came out. I think that every single year that MLB Pipeline's top 100 prospects is a great exercise because it's of all the people that make prospect lists like very publicly, like the big publications, I think it's very much known as the worst. But in terms of people who are getting into prospects, getting into dynasty baseball, getting into the game of baseball itself, like this is the place that you go the most. So it kind of creates this
Yeah.
strange difference among where people perceive prospects. I think that is kind of a fun thing, but it's also kind of a weird, harmful thing. But in terms of the Mets, they had 4 guys in the top 100: Jet Williams at 45, Drew Gilbert at 53, Luis Angel Acuna at 66, and Ryan Clifford at 97.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the guys that they're around. Jet Williams is around Termar Johnson, who was at 44. They were both taken in the same draft. Termar Johnson was taken 4th overall. They play not the same position, which is pretty cool as well. Like Jet Williams plays shortstop and center field, so that's great. If you want to talk about just like value from a drafting standpoint, the Mets have got similar value out of a guy 10 picks later in the draft, which is really cool. Drew Gilbert is around someone like Matt Shaw, who was a top 15 pick in the draft last year. Chase Dolander was, I think, a top 10 pick from the Colorado Rockies. Noah Schultz is one of the best pitching prospects. Just some guys that are bunched around these players. And then Ryan Clifford being like a top 100 fringe prospect guy, just cool to see, because I think there's a world where you could leave Ryan Clifford off the top 100, and I wouldn't be upset about it. But to see that he's getting the recognition is always a great thing, because we know that the power is legit with Ryan Clifford.
Yeah, and Clifford has made and not made some of these lists, but those other 3 Mets, Gilbert, Acuna, and Jet, have all been in the top 100s of every single. Actually, Acuna might have missed Baseball America. Now I'm saying that loud.
Might have. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I'm not sure either. I kind of forget, but just nevertheless, it goes to show that last trade deadline, I think so far has been to this point, it's been successful getting these guys in the system, and also just to temper fans' expectations, because we want every single prospect to be a superstar, but like we want every guy to be the best. Like when you're a prospect ranked in this range, and again, we're saying this list is not perfect, but we're all it's a relatively similar range that these guys have been everyone. I think Gilbert and Jet got into like the top 30 of Baseball America, and I
Yeah.
think the top 40 of Prospectus. But when you're outside of the top even 5 prospects, like the bust rate is extreme. And when we say bust rate, that doesn't even mean like a guy becomes, I just to give like harrowing examples, like even like Tyrone Taylor, like that
Yeah.
wouldn't even be considered a bust, because that's a guy that's like a 2-ish win player if he was playing 600 plate appearances. Like Gilbert is like, he's like, he feels to me a lot like Nimmo did when he was coming up as a prospect, where the tools aren't gaudy, but he doesn't really have a hole. He could play good defense, and Gilbert, more than Nimmo, is like has like that fire, that craziness that like people want in baseball locker rooms. Like Jet has crazy upside because he has these insane walk rates compared with like relatively low strikeout rates, hits the ball really hard, especially for his size, and has like this premier defensive versatility where he can play the 2 most important defensive positions on the field arguably well. But he's also 5'6". So it's like there's always going to be limitations with these guys, and I think any of these 4 guys could become a stud based on naturally the law of averages. Like one of these 4 won't be a good major leaguer. It just has to be true. Like I hope they're all good. Right now I think they're all going to be at least good major leaguers. But law of averages, yeah, 4. I mean, someone's going to have to miss, and maybe two of the guys wind up okay. Maybe one of the guy makes an all-star team. But it is good that these lists keep coming out, and these very smart people in the scouting and the prospect world keep putting the Mets in a good spot here.
I just looked back at like 2021's top 100 from Pipeline. We'll say Pipeline's definitely, I think, gotten better in their evaluation as well of prospects, but like it's just funny revisionist history. 2021, Corbin Carroll 47, Francisco Alvarez 48. You then had Nick Madrigal ranked at number 40, which is just like insane. Like you were trying to tell me that Nick Madrigal, like, and again, that's kind of where Pipeline gets a little confusing. Is Nick Madrigal was probably always going to be a major league player just because he didn't strike out and had a good field tool. But like at the end of the day, he never had the ceiling that Corbin Carroll had, and he never had the ceiling that Francisco Alvarez would have either.
No, totally. I think also that's where Pipeline gets screwed up, is because most of the other projection prospect rankings have like a clear like ethos. Like
Yeah.
Baseball America kind of loves like floor. Baseball Prospectus, I feel like, goes for traits, and they use a little more advanced like methodology in getting their stuff like pitch design. Where Prospectus, it's like, here's some high draft picks, here's some guys who I think we think have high ceilings, here's some guy with some high floors, and then here's another guy who we ranked 74 last year and he played okay, so we have to keep him in the 70s. It's just like, it feels like they're working against themselves more than they're like objectively ranking these prospects, and you see less updates from them, so it's easier to like hold them accountable for this, because they're doing less and less turnover with these lists, opposed to Baseball America, who I think was doing monthly last year, and Prospectus, who does a time or two a year. Same with Fangraphs. So it's easy to say that baseball MLB Pipeline's imperfect with these rankings, but also you look at these, you're like, I can't even for a second comprehend why this guy's higher than that guy.
Yeah, no, totally. And like part of it too is they're like working with Major League Baseball. There's been a clear push by Major League Baseball in general to be talking about prospects more. And a lot of the guys on these lists like are going to be taken off within a week. Like Brian Rocchio is like 94 on the Cleveland Guardians right now, and he's going to be their opening day shortstop most likely. So it's like there's a little bit of hype being involved too in these young players and trying to build them up too as well. Regardless, Mets have 4 guys there. Always a good thing, especially from a farm system that even just a couple years ago was considered pretty weak. Nice to see that they're building it up still.
Yeah, and another huge part of that is all 4 of those guys. I'm assuming Clifford next year will start in Double-A rather than like the in Brooklyn where I really don't want him to hit anymore. But all 4 of those guys are upper minors guys, which once you reach the upper minors and you're ranked on these lists, you have a significantly higher chance of being a useful big leaguer, which is important. And this also didn't include Christian Scott, who we've talked a lot about.
Yes,
Matt Eddy talked a lot about. Baseball Prospectus has been pushing far up their list. Like he's a guy who it seems like basically everyone in the whole industry right now is very aware is going to be a major league pitcher, depending on the caliber, between like a back end guy and a front end guy, somewhere in between. And I'm very comfortable with Pipeline being the only ones to miss that.
Yeah, no, that makes me feel a little bit better, honestly, if I'm telling you the truth. I would be a little scared if they were early to the party with Christian Scott.
Exactly. Even though we're not even early anymore, but still, moving on here. Some other things that happened this week in baseball. We've talked a lot in the last few weeks about, I guess me more so I have, about like where the Mets offense comes in terms of steamer projections. I've talked to you guys about who they think's going to be good, who they think's going to be bad. We've talked about it in terms of TJ Stewart, Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, about how they compare to other players the Mets can have. 2 other projection systems have come out in the last week, and they're the 2 that are pretty widely known, especially in fantasy baseball circles, as 2 of the most trustworthy ones. One's the Bat X from Derek Hardy, and one is ATC from Ariel Cohen. ATC has been the best projection system as told by fantasy pros for 5 years running now, but it takes an amalgamation of other projection systems and kind of spits them all into one. While Derek Hardy's is like an original projection system. Like he puts the inputs in himself. He uses StatCast data. Like he creates it. He has the best original projection system, even though it's worse than ATC, but ATC uses his and fixes it up a little bit. But I wanted to point it out because these 2 are by far the least positive about the Mets offense so far compared to Steamer, which has been out for a while. Yeah, no, it was also funny. Shout out SNY because it feels like us and SNY are like watching each other's content right now. Maybe we're just being hopeful about it because they've been doing a lot of things that we've been doing. But they did a post last week that said Steamer projections that came out last week. Steamer projections came out in November, and SNY
we've been talking about it since November.
SNY in their post was like came out last week. It's like this is not true, but yeah, get after it, guys. But in the Bat X system, which is I like the best for hitters because it's the only projection system that like really folds in StatCast data and really weights it heavily. It only had Lindor, Nemo, and Pete as like actually good above average hitters for the Mets. And then
I will say, like from a conceptual standpoint, if you are talking about like this Mets team, the guys I would bet my life on 100% are going to be better than average hitters that are legit good. Those are the 3 best guys.
For sure, not even a question. That is the absolute bona fide truth. And then it has Alvarez, who again is like a 22-year-old catcher, as a slightly better than league average, but 22 home runs, only 470 plate appearances. And then it had some real stinky projections on Jeff McNeil, Starling Marte, Brett Baty, and Mark Vientos. And then compared to ATC, that was a little less favorable. They had Alvarez as 10% better than league average, McNeil's 10% better than league average, even DJ Stewart is better than league average, and then Marte, Vientos, and Baty all like right there next to league average. So a little different. Again, ATC year over year has been more accurate than the Bat X. And again, this is probably some advanced jargon. A lot of you guys are 15 seconds skipping right all the way through because you don't give a shit about some stupid projection systems. But it's just bring another thing into the pie to look at what this offense could be.
And you said Bat X uses StatCast more, right?
Bat X weights StatCast the most and folds it into original data, where ATC takes other projection systems and kind of puts them together and adds its own thing.
And to be fair, based on the seasons that we saw from those 4 guys you mentioned as well last year, and especially like with the StatCast data we have on Baty and Vientos, it totally makes sense as to why I would think they're going to be stinky because their data has been stinky. Like there's no way around it.
Totally. And these projection systems are always going to be less favorable to young hitters and players who just recently graduate from being prospects. It's always going to happen. And like that's where you get the biggest pops. That's where these systems are wrong more often than not. But it's also where these systems kind of fix us as fans and maybe fantasy players more often than not because we're going to be way too optimistic about guys like this, like so 100%. Much so. But then it'll miss a thing like Bobby Witt last year. They said he was going to be like barely better than league average. Who was going to this year? He might be like 50-50. Like he's like he looks like he's one of the best players in baseball all of a sudden. And like sometimes like you could be late to that because you're glued to the projections, or you can be early to that because you're like fuck the projections. Realistically, we should always be somewhere in the middle. none of these are gospel, but they're all kind of a useful tool in like how we're looking at baseball, because
100%.
baseball uses projections. So there it is. Baseball uses projections like so hardcore because there's just so much data and there's so many games, there's so many plate appearances, and there's so much information, and it's so crowdsourced. Like these are all just people who started doing these, and then now they've become like, for Derek Carr, at least, like he has, like, this is his job. It's his life now, projecting sports, making models. And Ariel Cohen has done great. He's also a Mets fan, the guy who does the ATC projection. He's a Long Island guy. He's a really funny follow on Twitter because like 98% of it is just him being like a super nerd, fancy baseball projections. And then 2% of it every weekend, he shouts out his slow pitch softball stats.
Nice.
Or maybe fast pitch, I can't remember, but he rakes. The guy rakes. So it's really funny. And he's funny. I met him before. He's like a nice guy. Just Ariel Cohen, Mets fan. You could probably figure out exactly what this guy sounds like and looks like. But he's the man. He's really cool and funny follow on Twitter. And just these projections are good if you guys want to like kind of be a little more like statistical and analytical in your baseball analysis. But also if you don't want to use them and don't care, I don't hold it against you in any way.
Yeah, no, totally. Watch the game, see what happens. That's really what all needs to happen at the end of the day.
That's the Mets vibe this year. Watch the game, have some fun.
Yeah, watch the game. You gotta love some baseball. Gotta love some baseball. I mean, it's just been a weird offseason in general, not even just for the Mets, but in baseball as a whole. There's a huge problem, I think, going on in Major League Baseball. And I'm assuming you agree too, James, but the offseason sucks. And it's a problem. The fact that this offseason for this sport, which genuinely has the shortest offseason actually out of any sport, right? It feels like the longest by far.
I think NBA might be shorter from when the finals end because that's like what, middle of June, and they start again middle of October. Like
I guess technically, like most teams' season ends in May, but the actual NBA doesn't end until like June 28th. So
yeah, exactly, and they start like around Halloween. But nevertheless, like there's definitely a problem in Major League offseason, and we kind of hoped as fans that this would be solved a little bit, like based on when they negotiated the new CBA a few years ago. And it seems like, I don't want to say it's gotten worse because I think this is a weird offseason separate from all that stuff, but it definitely hasn't gotten better. And we're sitting here right now talking on January 30th. I mean, hopefully none of these guys sign overnight by the time you guys listen to the show, but Blake Snell, who just won the Cy Young, Jordan Montgomery, who was like relatively close to winning World Series MVP, Cody Bellinger, who just had it's like a 6-win season, Matt Chapman, who just had like a 5-6 win season, I think 7 on Baseball Reference, JD Martinez, who's been an all-star, like 7 times in the last 10 years, maybe. And Jorge Soler, who's like become truly one of the best right-handed power hitters in baseball. None of those guys have teams. None of those guys have contracts. None of those guys, there's really been anything close besides a fake rumor about Matt Chapman to the Cubs a few days ago. That was really fake as hell. Got me. Today I woke up this morning. I was like, oh yeah, Matt Chapman's a Cub. Someone was like, no, he's not. I'm like, what, really? And I looked it up. I was like, oh, that was fake. My bad. But pitchers and catchers report in 2 weeks. Like we start the season 2 months less, and those guys don't have teams. Those are some of the best free agents the whole offseason. It's bizarre. I
think one of the major problems is the fact that there is one big guy, and I don't even think I respect the hell out of Scott Boras. He is the best agent. There is no doubt. If you were a player, I would want Scott Boras as my agent. The guy just gets you the most money, it seems like, if you are the best player. But right now we're getting into that weird spot where guys like Cody Bellinger, Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, Matt Chapman, and JD Martinez, who are all represented by Scott Boras, are not the best players at their position. They are very much on the fringe of that like really good tier. Blake Snell's the most interesting one because he does have those 2 Cy Young awards, but even still, there are teams who clearly are concerned about what kind of Blake Snell you're going to get every single year, because when you get 180 innings, he's a Cy Young. When you don't, he's just a weird little pitcher that's kind of not going to be worth the money you're going to have to pay him. But I think one of the big problems is that all this talent is held up by the same guy, being Scott Boras, who's trying to get the most money for all these guys. And right now, none of the teams want to give these guys any money. So they're not signing because they're not getting the contracts that Boras thinks they should. It's such a weird like gridlock that we have between teams probably being smarter than Boras relatively in this one scenario of, we'll just wait. Go ahead. Let spring training come. Your players are going to get frustrated. They're going to get antsy, and we'll sign them for way cheaper.
Calling Blake Snell a weird little pitcher is so mean.
He is a weird little pitcher, though.
122 pitchers ever with 2 Cy Youngs. You get that out of your mouth. He was amazing.
He's a weird little pitcher.
He's a strange case, but he's not a weird little pitcher. He's a great pitcher, but everything else is weird. But it's also, this used to be okay with Boras because this has always been his philosophy. Like, wait as long as possible. I don't care. I'm going to get the most money for my guys. Whenever that contract comes to me, then I will sign it. I will not sign it. Except for what?
Stephen Drew. And Stephen Drew is very similar to, I'm not going to put him in Blake Snell or JD Martinez because those guys have had like elite success for a couple different seasons here and there. But Steven Drew, when he hit that offseason, remember, after the huge years with the Diamondbacks, and ended up, I think, not signing until like midseason, maybe with like the Nationals or the Yankees. I don't remember where he went first. But it took a while for him to sign because he was one of those fringe guys of whether or not he was actually truly good or not. And he was a Boris client, I believe, at the time. And that was like the first time I remember being like, whoa, a player I thought was good, nobody wants. Like, what's going on here?
I think another part of it that's weird is that it used to be that Boris was kind of only part of this massive amount of agents and players. So his philosophy like would stand out, but also things would feel like they were moving a little more swiftly, a little more naturally because he wasn't the only agent. But right now, like you said, he represents the five biggest free agents left in the market besides Jorge Soler, who arguably could be outside that top five. So there's reason to believe that the top five guys still out there are all Scott Boris. And like this, if that's the philosophy for every single guy, we're totally stuck like we are right now. It's total molasses. Another part of it, like you were just talking about, is like this free agency didn't really have this super exciting middle class. Like we had Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto, who everyone was like, this is why the market's held up. Once these guys go, like pop the lid off, like we're getting contracts every which way. And it just didn't happen at all. Even a couple guys who we thought were like some of the better free agents out there, especially better values, Aaron Nola and Sonny Gray, signed in November. They signed like before Christmas. So that happened. It feels like a lifetime ago. Those guys got their contracts. And now we're in the situation where these guys are just totally stuck and we're sitting. And a couple other parts of that is just that we still have the qualifying offer that's attached to a couple of these guys, Bellinger, Chapman, Snell. So apart from dealing with his agent, who basically is holding completely firm and steady, you have to decide whether this player with obvious flaws, Bellinger being that he was cut 2 years ago, Matt Chapman being that 2 years ago he was horrifically bad, and the whole second half this year he was horrifically bad, and Blake Snell's only thrown more than 130 innings twice his entire career. Like we're going to be committing hundreds of millions of dollars to these guys. Okay, let's make that decision. But also now, on top of that decision, you have to decide whether you also want to give up your first round pick next year. Like that is a crazy thing for an organization to decide. And then there's so much more that goes into this. And that's why you go through this offseason where basically all the free agent deals have been like 1 year contracts are being given out, besides some really elite guys. And then the only two that really stick out to me were, I think, Heimer Candelario, who got 3 years, and Eduardo Rodriguez, who got 4. I think most people inside the baseball world would be like, those contracts look stupid. Like those aren't contracts I would want to give those guys at all. I don't want to give Eduardo Rodriguez 4 years. 2 years ago, he left the Tigers. He just left. No one talks about that. And he has massive knee issues, and no one talks about either.
He also has the heart thing too. Like that's genuinely scary. Like,
legitimately, like all three of those things have happened. What, like the last 5 years? And he just got a 4-year deal. Like this, I don't think the last 2 years that contract looked good at all. Even the first two look good. He's like strike guys out. Like I don't really trust his skills. And Candelario's fine. He'll probably mash in Cincinnati, but they have like 5 young infielders. They added a 6 to the list on a 3-year deal. All the places you can spend money for the Reds, that's what you do. So like why are we in this spot right now? And then a lot of this, I still think, will boil right down to the goddamn CBA that they signed, where it was a witch hunt out for Steve Cohen, the New York Mets. And I'll say it honestly, because they were so scared about this billionaire spending all this money and taking advantage of the whole league that they added all of these levels of these tax lines. And now every team in the league is scared to pass them because they just saw what happened in the Mets last year, where they went past all this stuff, had to pay $100 million in fees. 2 years in a row, the draft pick got pushed back. And now your team isn't even good and you're still paying these penalties. Luckily, we have an owner who's willing to do that and isn't really upset about doing that. And now we are seeing a readjustment, realignment of strategy. But most other teams, they'd probably have to close up shop if there was something that happened like this.
And I think another big problem too is that, like, Montgomery, we heard, wants like $20+ million a year. Blake Snell's going to want a mega contract. Cody Bellinger, I'm sure, wants big money too. But all the teams that are like legitimate contenders right now are the ones that are going to be close to that like penalty tax threshold. The Rays are not spending any money. They're one of the few teams that's not going to be. The Orioles aren't spending any money. They're one of the few teams that aren't going to be. But for the teams that are bad, none of these guys make you particularly better immediately right now to a point where you all of a sudden want to go for it. So it's just like a combination of bad free agent market right now. The players there are good, but they're not great. They're not amazing. They're not game changers per se. They don't change the outlook of your organization. And the fact that the CBT threshold thing is a real problem. And this is probably why the players were a little bit scared, why they were like, we can't sign these deals because we're going to get screwed. And we're seeing it happen right now.
Totally. And that's becoming, again, like this middle class of free agency this year doesn't even exist. And we've talked about before that it feels like in baseball right now, a lot of organizations have this hive mind where everyone has their own type of war that they use to evaluate player value. Everyone has probably their own stuff models where they use to evaluate pitchers and their pitches to see what their pitches actually are and how they can project them to be in the future. And every single team kind of just uses their own projection system, even as broadly as that. So like everyone is kind of on the same page about every free agent these days. Whereas if you go back even 5 and 10 years, a guy like Jordan Montgomery, who just crushed the playoffs, was like a key contributor in the second half after a big trade to get a team over the finish line. Like someone would have ponied up like the 200 mil and been an idiot. Like someone would have done that. Cody Bellinger, a guy who like was an MVP candidate, died, came almost all the way back, but the underlying data didn't really support as far back as he came. Some team would have been like, I don't care about those stupid numbers. Like I see the guy that he is. Like I know he's
like
still
the
an
Rockies.
I know he's still an MVP candidate. Even the Rockies have analytics guys now. Like for the last year, they've gotten like 7 of them in the building there. But like I know he can be the guy he is. Like someone would look at Matt Chapman, like watch his defensive highlights and like guy's a good baseball face. Look at his glove at third. Like look at that power. Look how hard he swings. Like I'd love to do that. But like all the teams now kind of have the same idea about every guy. So it's just this pure impasse. And you were talking about it before, kind of the teams are going for it and the teams that are not. Like I actually went and wrote down where every single team is in terms of the thresholds. And the only teams right now over the competitive balance tax line are the Mets, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Phillies, the Astros, and the Braves. I think basically all of those could have been guessed mostly, besides the fact the Red Sox don't care about money anymore. And the Blue Jays and the Rangers are really, really close. But the Rangers have gotten screwed by their TV contract, which we're going to talk to a little bit after this as well. And now the Braves, the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Mets are the only teams who are even over that first penalty tier, which is $20 million higher in the line. And this year the line is $237 million. So those are the only teams that have payrolls over $257 million. And then the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Mets are the only team over the next tier, where Atlanta's $9 million short, which that like $9 million short is like, they're like, we could get one more guy. We could get one more player. We could get another reliever. We can get another like fringe bat. We can get another fringe arm. Like we know we have it built in right now to get one more guy. Maybe they're waiting for the trade deadline. Maybe they're going to wait for a contract before the end of free agency. Maybe that, but that's like a very obvious amount of money that they're right there close to. And then the Dodgers and the Mets are the only teams over the fourth tier, which I think is like what, like I think it's like 100% tax or something like that. If I remember,
it's the Steve Cohen tax.
It's the Steve Cohen tax, and the Yankees are $3 million short of that line, which is not an accident that they're only $3 million short of that line and seem to not really be going for these other guys. They're as good of a team as they believe they can be up against that third line, and they're like, if we want to blow out of the water, we can blow it out of the water, because they did go for Yamamoto. They've been loosely linked to Blake Snell, so they're aware that they're going to either stay directly as close to that line as they could possibly get, or just steamroll it and go all the way. So clearly, these teams that are as competitive, World Series aspirations, like I'm talking about the Astros, the Braves, the Yankees, the Phillies, they've gone to these lines and they have stopped. And that's a big reason for that, is because they've added these different luxury tax penalty lines in the CBA. And another huge part of this, which sucks because I hate it so much, is the fucking expanded playoffs. Because now, especially seeing the last few years, the Phillies, the Diamondbacks, the Padres, these teams,
the Rangers,
why am I building the best team I can for the regular season? Why do I care about being the 1, 2, or 3 seed? Why do I care about winning my division? There's such a lower bar to reach right now to making the playoffs. Like I need 85 wins basically to get into the dance. And all I have to do is get into the dance, then really anything can happen.
And to be an 85 win team, I know the Rangers, like they spend a lot of money, but if you look at where they spent their money, it was on the best players at their position. Like they didn't really waste money on bad players per se for any of these bad positions. But like to build an 85 win team versus a 100 win team, the money difference is massive. It's really, really hard. That's why when the Rays do it, it's so insane, but you can't really build a 100 win team and not spend a lot of money. It's almost impossible.
No, that's also why the Mets contract right now, the Mets situation seems like shit, because we're spending $300 million. The team is really basically a 500 team. We really wish it could be better. But with the playoff situation, and with the fact that these teams are kind of changing their approach, and with the fact that, like I said, the Mets are kind of chilling right now, and the Padres are chilling right now, as two of the teams that were driving this market mostly for the last 2 years. I'm trying to find the name of the Padres owner that passed away. I can't remember it. What was his name?
Don't know.
I can't remember his name. Peter Seidler. Peter Seidler passed away. It seemed like that was kind of a big reason they were pushing so hard, and now sadly he has passed away, and now it's not happening anymore. Like those are two of the teams that were as aggressive in this market of the last 2 years are no longer inside of it. That changes the market dramatically. And then we have the Blue Jays, who've really tried for big fish, and they have missed every which way. They just got Justin Turner and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa as the guys who they're filling the rest of their infield with, which is like, are you guys kidding me? Like Cody Bellinger is still a good fit for them, but we don't know if that's going to work. And again, they're like really, really close to that first tax line, so they're willing to go over it, but they haven't. Philly spent huge the last few years, but their roster feels complete to them, and they have stopped. Now they got Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler all locked up. I guess Wheeler only 1 more year. And then So that kind of leaves the only teams right now that are like actually in the mix and not pushing up against one of these tax tiers are the Cubs, the Giants, and the Rangers, who I think have been teams that are really connected to a lot of these free agents that are still kind of like fiddling around out there. But then we got to talk about the fact that half the teams in baseball are losing their cable television rights
Yep.
by the end of next season. It's happening to the Padres, the Diamondbacks, the Rockies, the Twins, the Rangers, the Guardians, the Royals, the Reds, the Angels, the Braves, which is crazy to me, the Tigers, the Marlins, the Cardinals, the Rays, and the Brewers.
Although,
What?
has this changed? Because I think Amazon stepped in and bought Bally out, I think.
Well, I know that Bally, that was the end of their bankruptcy restructure. So I know
Okay.
they bought them out, but I still don't know exactly what the terms are of what those
Okay,
teams are
that's
getting.
fine.
Maybe that deal had a lot to do with the Astros kind of stepping in at the 11th hour and giving Hader that huge contract.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe they knew the Rangers had like 3 weeks until they knew their TV money was going to come in. Because
Yeah.
this cable TV money for these teams is like tens of millions of dollars a year. Like this was a huge part of their bottom lines.
Yeah.
And we're lucky as Mets fans that this is not affecting us because we have SNY still. Like we don't know what the future of sports on television is going to be, especially as local cable networks. But again, luckily it's not affecting us. But I just mentioned half the league that basically lost tens of millions of dollars out of their bottom line heading into this offseason. And I'm certain that affected the way they went about free agency.
So I'm looking up, there's an article from the New York Post back in 2021 that mentioned that essentially like when the Wilpons were still owning the Mets and owned SNY as they still do, SNY is what made all the money for them. Essentially, it's kind of what allowed them to continue to own the Mets was having SNY. That SNY was generating $150 million a year in pure profits back in 2021. And these RSNs, which regional sports networks, for those of you, these contracts are huge. This is a big reason why like copyright stuff on the internet with like these clips of these games are so important, is because these companies spend so much money to be the exclusive rebroadcast or broadcasters of these games and these clips. So that's why there was always such a big deal. And that's why there are blackouts, is because of how much money is in these deals.
Yes. And again, I don't think that the details of the Amazon deal are out. I think it only happened like a couple weeks ago, which does actually really coincide with that Hader thing, which is kind of funny. But maybe that's a new way for these teams to get their revenue back, but definitely really hasn't happened yet. What?
Wow. Okay. I'm reading more of this. SNY, it says, also benefits from super low costs via a sweet deal to pay the Mets a below market price of about $85 million a year for its rights to the games. So basically, the Wilpons created a cheap deal for SNY so that they can make, wow, that's super interesting. Is this allowed? But it seems like they were paying less from the media company that they own to the team that they own, so that it seems like they could seem like they're generating more profits to maybe make SNY seem more profitable, because they
owned it themselves. They gave themselves a good deal.
Yes, they gave themselves a good deal to then make it seem like they're making more profit. I mean, I'm going to say this, props to them. It's great. That's a great move. That's a baller move right there. But also, it's fucking us right now, because it sounds like the Mets rights for the games for the year could be making way more money for the team.
Fucking billionaires, man. They always have an angle. God, they're so ridiculous.
But $85 million a year goes to the Mets because of that. So imagine, and apparently that's below market price. So imagine what this means to all these other teams as well.
Yeah, it means a lot. And again, we are lucky as a Mets that we had this deal that was with ourselves. Like we were able to produce and do these games in like a way that was symbiotic. Whereas these other teams were using this larger company, Bally's, that just went under. Now they're going to be under the umbrella of Amazon, which is cutthroat. We don't know what that looks like yet. And again, we're not going to bore you guys talking about this a lot because one, we don't super understand it. We're not like cable or media experts. And two, it luckily does not affect the Mets. So if you're coming here for Mets content, you probably don't really care too much about this. But just as a way to describe why this offseason sucks, it's a huge part of the equation that you can't overlook.
100%. Hey. I do say it a lot. Oh my God. But really, like, it's just, there is a problem though, because you're not going to have Shohei Ohtani and Bryce Harper and Juan Soto every single offseason. It's just not going to happen.
Manny Machado. Yamamoto.
Yeah, and especially now with these younger players, a lot of the better younger players being Latin, and we've seen that Latin players, and this is just a thing. Like, look back in the history, players not born in America that are Latin, they typically don't hit free agency. Like Juan Soto is doing a rare thing right now where he's going to hit free agency as a Dominican-born player and look for big, big money. But like Ronald Acuna Jr. signed that contract early to make sure he got that money. Julio Rodriguez signed that contract early. Luis Robert signed a contract early with the White Sox. Like you look at all the big Latin players, their first contract typically doesn't come from free agency. They're usually pretty active in trying to make sure that they get that money up front.
I'm even right now trying to think, besides Ohtani, who was the last foreign-born player to actually reach free agency? I don't really count Lindor because he went through the draft. I'm someone who was an international signee. I guess
Correct.
Correa.
Nope, he was also the number one overall pick.
Devers got an extension, never reached free agency.
Yep.
Yamamoto, Japanese, different. Someone who came through international free agency. Bogarts? Where'd Bogarts? Was he an international signing?
He was an international signee. That's a good one. But he had a contract from the Red Sox first, though. He took an early contract from them as well. So he hit free agency, I think, like 2 years later than he would have.
But it is fascinating if you guys like using these contract tools and kind of like this kind of conversation to go on Spotrac. I know some people use COTS contracts. I like Spotrac to have a much easier table to just sort players in baseball by their AAV. If you sort the league by its AAV, like you're not going to find a Latin-born player who changed teams in free agency. Nope. It was a trade. It was an extension. Jose Ramirez never reached free agency. Edwin kind of reached free agency, but not really. Jose Abreu, but that was different.
That's why it makes it so fucked what the Braves do even more signing. Like Matt Olson should have hit free agency. Austin Riley should hit free agency. All these guys should be hitting free agency, and they still sign them for so cheap. It's frustrating.
It is, but it just kind of goes to show that the ecosystem of Major League Baseball, the business side, is not really great. And it hasn't been, it seems like, for a while. And
it's great for the teams, not great for the players.
Yeah, it's not great for the players. I should stipulate, it's not great for the players. And it's a situation where right now it's just like, everyone's kind of chilling. They're just resting back on their billions. They're making their profits. Like, let's try to win 87 games. Like that is kind of how the Mets are going into the season, which I guess will bring us to the last thing we want to talk about this episode, which is just the, I'll talk about this as like the finger on the pulse right now between the Mets organization and just like where the fans are. And Tim Britton, who's long time been one of the best beat writers of any team, any sport in the country. Now he works for The Athletic. Got to know him last year a little bit. He's a great guy. He's in our circle of trust of Mets writers, along with it's Britton. I would say Disha, but she's national writer now. I guess DeComo still is. He's still a good writer.
DeComo doesn't do a lot of opinion stuff. He kind of just tells you what it is.
Yeah, he's got the stank of Major League Baseball on him, so he's kind of has to be a propaganda man. And then our boy Tim Healy, of course.
Yes.
I think we might be forgetting. Pat Ragazzo's still good, but I don't know what happened to SI. I don't know where.
Shout out Tim for hosting the Baseball Writers Awards the other night. Apparently did a great job.
Will Salmon's also great. Hopefully Tim and Will Salmon, people we've gotten built relationships with, will come on this podcast soon, hopefully around spring training when you kind of want to hear what the beat writers are seeing, doing all that stuff. But Tim Britton did an amazing Mets fan survey on The Athletic.
Yes.
If you guys have an Athletic subscription, check it out because it is hysterical. So this survey opens up with, what was your favorite moment of the 2023 season? And the top answer, as voted by Mets fans, was when it ended. And you guys might think, okay, that makes sense. That's pretty funny. Ha, ha, ha. But the best part of this comes from the second question that Tim Britton asked. When did you check out the 2023 season? And 50% of Mets fans on the survey said, I watched until the bitter end. Which, if there isn't something that describes how much of fucking sickos we are, the cult that we're in, the toxic relationship that we bound ourselves to, that is it. My favorite part was when the season ended, and I watched every game. Perfect.
Masochists. We're masochists. We're like, we know it's going to be bad, but I got to see it. I got to make sure it's bad. Because if I don't, what if it was good and I missed it?
No, exactly. I don't want to miss anything. Pure masochism right there. And also part of that is just the fact that like right now, it seems like most Mets fans are not tremendously excited about this team. I think we're in the minority where we're like, we just kind of want to see some ball. Like I want to see a team grind. I want to see if a player can exceed their expectations. I want to see if we could find bullpen stuff. Like I want to try and go 500 and see if we could steal a few games and make the playoffs. Like we're in the minority being like, we just love baseball so much. Or like, I just want to see baseball in front of my face. I don't really care what else is happening. Like I want to see a bat and a ball and a mound and a glove and a diamond and dirt right in front of my face. That's the only thing I want. I think most fans aren't like that.
I think the average fan thinks nothing's happened this offseason with the Mets. Yeah. And it's like, because the average fans goes, well, you didn't sign Ohtani, you didn't sign Yamamoto, you didn't sign anybody. Like, what are we doing with this?
From the same Tim Britton article, I want to go through a couple more of these survey results before we end here because it's truly hilarious. I love Mets fans so much. We're the best people on earth.
I didn't see any of the other ones here, so this will be a pure reaction.
Another one. How would you grade David Stern's first offseason as president of baseball operations? Guess what grade? And this was the best grade by 15 percentage points. So it had a pretty large margin. Guess what was the number one grade given?
I think they're going to go C.
It was a B.
Whoa. Okay, Mets
40%
fans.
of fans said B. And also, I think there's Mets fans that subscribe to The Athletic, so I'm sure it's a little bit of Mets fans who are a little more in tune, read a little bit more, like do stuff
Got
like
to pay
that.
to vote.
But the other part of this is, okay, so B came in first, C plus came in second, C came in third, B plus came in fourth. And then 6% of Mets fans responded F, and
Nice.
2% of Mets fans responded A. So 3 times as many Mets fans think David Stearns gets an F so far compared to an A, which I think that's amazing. That's my favorite thing about the Mets. How do you feel about the hiring Carlos Mendoza as manager? 73% said indifferent.
I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair.
It's a great one. 13% the other side. Let's see. Let's give me some other ones here that were funny. Sign short-term DH. People just this is a good one. Do you have a strong preference for a DH option for the Mets? It was Soler, JD Martinez, Justin Turner. 30% said any of the above. I don't care. Just give me somebody, which is great. And then besides that, none of these were really great. Besides one more that made me laugh, which was the free agent acquisition for the Mets that you were most excited for? Very obviously, I think 34% of Mets fans said Luis Severino. Mm-hmm. What came in second is something that's become, I think, a little famous on Mets Twitter, especially responding to the Mets official tweets this year. It was the Mad Max "That's Bait" meme, which is under like a lot of the Mets posts this offseason. I've been seeing it around.
I don't know.
27%, that's bait. That one.
Oh, yes.
27% of Mets fans said that was their second favorite offseason acquisition. So
nice.
Yeah, shout out to Tim Britton. I think it was a great piece. Also, last one I thought that was interesting. How do you feel about P. Alonso for a long-term contract? 55% pay whatever it takes. And if P. Alonso is not a Met in 2025, how will you feel? 50% devastated, 45% mildly disappointed, 5% I'm okay.
I mean, to be honest, I'm in that same boat. Like, I want Pete back so badly, but I'm also in the same boat of you're not getting paid Freddie Freeman money. That's not happening.
No, but again, I love you guys, Mets fans. Like, we are the best. Like, there's no one better in sports than us. Like, we're sick in the head. We're completely fucked up, and I wouldn't want it any other way.
No, I mean, I haven't made any content in like a week because I've been sick, and I'm like, gotta make sure I'm ready for the podcast though, so I can talk about Adam Ottavino and Justin Turner and prospects and why the offseason sucks for an hour. We thought this was gonna be a short one. It's not possible for us. When me and James get talking baseball, it's an hour. It's an hour guaranteed.
And that's fine. I prefer to do a podcast that takes a little longer, so you guys have something more to listen to.
Yeah. But guys, as always, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I'm feeling a little bit better, so you should start to see a little bit more content on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube this upcoming week and moving forward. Make sure you're following us on all our social media at Mets'd on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. What were you going to say, James?
I was going to say, I think Mark and I are going to have a TikTok race where so far, since we've been independent, I think Mark's made 1. I think I've made like 9.
Yeah.
No, yeah, we're gonna have a TikTok race.
Yeah, I'll catch up quickly. It's just I've been doing things. So, but I got nothing else. James, where can they follow you on Twitter?
James_Shiano.
Major Raffneck Mark with a C. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out.
See you guys next time.